If you love classic cars, then Donald loves you. Hello, and welcome back to Balance and Power, the world on two wheels, 1885 to 1995. Today, I'm joined by Chuck Gilchrist, who is going to talk about Honda and the amazing adventure that Honda has had in establishing not only itself in motorcycles, but really helping to create the motorcycle market as we know it today. Chuck, tell us where this sort of all started.
Well, post-World War II, Soichiro Honda thought that it would be great to have a 50cc motorcycle that he too could export around the world. He came up with this great idea for a pushrod four-stroke engine that was going to, in time, revolutionize motorcycling, in part due to a great advertising campaign that you know a little bit about too.
Ever so slightly, you do meet the nicest people on a Honda.
That's true. And even to that point, Honda came out with another great advertising campaign of Honda, we make it simple. But as we'll see, that wasn't always the case.
Now, Chuck, what difference does it make to someone who's riding a small displacement bike that it's a two-stroke versus a four-stroke?
One of the biggest differences was reliability. The four-stroke engine could prove itself in a variety of different conditions. It wasn't prone to overheating, it was easy to service, and more than anything else, with Honda's investment in a huge plant, a manufacturing plant, interchangeable parts were readily available.
The other interesting thing, you mentioned the fact that Soichiro Honda was fascinated by engineering and engineering solutions. He didn't like the simple way, he'd like the best way. And you know, at this time, thinking about the fact that Honda was also in everything from Formula One racing to establishing their automotive business around the world as well. And how much of that thinking you think went into the Honda 50s and their successors?
Well, a lot of it did, Donald. In their Formula One events, they were using very sophisticated high-revving engines. In motorcycling, they jumped into the Grand Prix circuit as well and developed a 5-cylinder 125cc Grand Prix bike along with a 6-cylinder 250. You had tiny little pistons turning at over 20,000 RPM, which wasn't all that much far off from their Formula One cars.
And this bike that we're standing next to now, this Honda 55, to me, to my eyes, it looks like sort of a cross between a scooter and a motorcycle. What does that mean to its usage as for a consumer?
It was very much as much of a scooter as it was a motorcycle. In Europe, scooters were wildly popular, and as we can see in this picture behind us, this bike was also available with a small valance that would protect your legs and keep the engine cleaner as well. So very much so, it was a scooter and a motorcycle at the same time, and went on to sell millions and millions of copies of this particular bike.
Honda probably did, arguably, you can argue with me if you want, more than any of the manufacturers really popularize motorcycles to make them acceptable to a much wider audience than before.
Absolutely, Donald. Their campaign of you meet the nicest people on a Honda really went a long way toward that. Motorcycling, unfortunately, in the late 50s and early 60s, had a little bit of a tough image to try and sell. There were movies that talked about motorcycle gangs, about all sorts of strife within motorcycling in general. But to meet the nicest people on a Honda, and you had family people, you had all people from all walks of life jumping onto motorcycles, from little people to big people, that went a long way for the Honda brand.
And when you did your motorcycle racing, did you ride Hondas?
I really didn't too much. Hondas were, at the time I was racing, were not as competitive. Two-stroke motorcycles did give you a little bit of a performance advantage, and so I tended to concentrate on smaller displacement two-strokes with the understanding that at the time I was a much smaller person too.
We're going to see in a little while a very different kind of Honda. And what do you think gave Honda the ability to operate at all ends of the market the way they did?
One of the real reasons was that of their infrastructure. They created a wonderful dealer network. They got to listen to what their customers were wanting. And as they established themselves with smaller displacement motorcycles that would actually outperform some of the larger bikes on the market, the 305 Superhawk was a motorcycle that could rival the 500 Triumph and even the big Harley-Davidson Sportster, despite only having 300 cc's of power.
And that's a philosophy that actually carried through all of Honda's products, from motorcycles, cars, all sorts of equipment that Honda manufactured, the ability sort of to be a giant killer, as it were.
Very much so. Honda succeeded on the racetrack, it succeeded in the showroom, and never stopped innovating. They were very open to moving some of their racing technology into street motorcycles, but they arguably also created the touring bike market as well, with bikes like the CB750K and subsequently the Honda Goldwing.
We're going to take a look at some of those motorcycles in a little bit, but coming back to the 55, what is the experience of riding a 55 like today versus the way it was when it was brand new?
Well, Honda still manufactures small motorcycles like the Monkey and the Grom, which are very popular today among younger riders and even some adult riders as well. A bike like this would have a tough time keeping up with modern traffic. This has a top speed of roughly about 40, maybe 45 miles an hour, with only 55 cc's at its beck and call. However, as Honda grew and made a much more variety of different bikes, ranging from 50 cc's up to 1,000 cc's, they literally had a engine category for just about everybody.
And how difficult is it to find a bike like this, a Honda 50 or 55, in this kind of condition that's not been modified, that is basically original today?
Well, they are so popular, or were so popular, that replacement parts are easy to maintain. Some of the aftermarket companies have actually gone into business making remanufactured, or in some cases, brand new cast parts for the Honda 50s, which allows you, if on your 40 or 50 year old Honda 50, be it a little mini trail or one of these bikes, you can still get parts for them, which is wonderful.
Which brings us to, I think, one of the most interesting things for me about this. You mentioned mini trail. The fact that this is a motorcycle that you can use on the street and also as an off-road motorcycle if you wanted to as well. Let's talk a little bit about that.
This particular bike was developed as a purely street motorcycle. However, Honda did realize that much of his market would be in various third world countries. So they made it very durable, not necessarily with a lot of suspension travel, but just enough to get over rough roads. There were some motorcycle dealers up in the Northwest in the United States that found that they were selling lots and lots of these little Honda 50s, but the people were modifying them and putting larger sprockets on the back of the bike so that they could use them ostensibly as a motorized horse, or sort of an early ATV, if you will. And so Honda said, maybe we ought to sell a trail version of this. And this was the result, the Trail 55. And it even came stock with 2-size rear sprockets and an extra length of chain that could be added to the stock chain so that you could actually change gearing. It took about 10 minutes or so. And even a little bit later on in development, Honda developed a 2-speed high and low range gearbox for these bikes as well.
Well, the idea that you could have this great practicality and adaptability, I'm sure helped its popularity tremendously. And am I correct that this was, if not the best-selling motorcycle in the world, one of the best-selling motorcycles in the world?
It certainly was one of the best-selling motorcycles in the world, and in its different variants, close to 500 million of them were sold. In fact, it's one of the best-selling pieces of mechanical equipment of all time.
The sort of Model T of the motorcycle world.
And then some.
Fantastic.